The key stopped halfway in the lock. Elias Turner stood on his own front porch with a paper sack of takeout in one hand and a cold wind pressing through the collar of his work jacket. And for a second he thought he was simply more tired than usual. He had spent 11 hours at the shop rebuilding a transmission for a delivery van whose owner swore he would lose everything if it wasn't ready by morning. His knuckles were split. His shoulders ached. The smell of oil, metal, and winter air still clung to him the way it had clung to his father for most of his childhood. He tried the key again. It didn't fit. Not sticky. Not jammed. Wrong. Elias lowered the bag of food to the porch boards and stared at the brass deadbolt under the yellow light. This was not his lock. Not the brushed nickel one he had installed 2 summers ago after Vivian complained the old lock looked cheap in the realtor photos she kept posting online. This was darker, newer, sharper around the edges. He could still see fresh screwdriver marks near the plate. For a long moment he didn't move. Then he heard the sound that finished the thought for him. Laughter. Soft and female and familiar, floating from somewhere inside the house. Not joy. Not warmth. The kind of laughter people use when they've already decided you are the joke. Elias straightened slowly and looked through the sidelight window beside the door. The foyer lamp was on. So was the dining room chandelier. One of the tall white candles Vivian liked to set out when she wanted the house to look expensive from the street burned in the front window, throwing gold across the entry table. His boots were still on the mat inside. His jacket hook still held the old navy raincoat he kept meaning to replace. But the lock had changed. He reached for his phone. One text from Vivian, sent 23 minutes earlier. Don't make a scene. Your things are in the garage. I need space and frankly, I'm done living like a mechanic's widow. Also, I sold the Chevelle. We needed the cash more than we needed your nostalgia. Elias read it once. Then again. His face did not immediately change. Men like him are often mistaken for calm when what they really are is stunned beyond reaction. He looked toward the driveway. The first space was empty. The second held Vivian's white Range Rover, polished and smug under the porch light. The third, the one nearest the detached garage, should have held the car. His car. The 1969 Chevelle SS he had spent 8 years restoring. The one his father had left to him in rusted pieces and a promise. The one he rebuilt panel by panel, paycheck by paycheck, during nights when the shop was quiet and life was louder than he knew how to answer. The one his father used to say sounded like forgiveness trying to clear its throat. It was gone. Something in Elias's chest pulled so tight it almost felt mechanical, as if one hard turn had snapped a part inside him clean in half. The front curtain moved. Vivian was standing there, not hiding, watching. She held a wineglass in one hand and her phone in the other, as if she had been waiting for this exact view. Her husband outside, confused, locked out, looking at the space where his car had been. She was beautiful in the polished, deliberate way she had worked very hard to become. Blonde hair smooth over one shoulder, cream sweater tucked into expensive dark jeans, gold hoops at her ears, expression composed enough to pass for reasonable if you didn't know the mathematics of cruelty. At 39, Vivian Turner could still enter a room and make people assume softness before speech corrected them. Their eyes met through the glass. Elias lifted the phone slightly, not in accusation, simply to indicate he had read the text. Vivian mouthed something. He couldn't hear it. Then she smiled. Not big, not theatrical, just enough. Then she turned away. That was the moment the numbness left. He hit the door once with the flat of his hand so hard the glass rattled. Vivian! The laughter stopped inside. The takeout bag tipped over on the porch boards. Sesame chicken bleeding grease through white paper. A porch light flicked on across the street. Mrs. Hargrove, 73 and sleepless by habit, shifted her curtain half an inch. Elias stepped back from the door, dragged both hands over his face, and forced himself to breathe. Do not give her a scene. That thought came not from pride but from exhaustion. Because scenes are expensive. Because every public fracture costs something private later. Because men who work with machines learn early that if you strike damaged things too hard, you only scatter the pieces farther. He bent, picked up the spilled food, and walked toward the detached garage. 2 suitcases sat just inside the open side door. One duffel. A plastic grocery sack full of toiletries. A black trash bag bulging with what looked like boots and folded flannel shirts. She had packed for him the way one clears out a storage room. No note. No explanation beyond the text. Nothing except her final sentence, sitting in his phone like a blade. I sold the Chevelle. Elias set the food down on the workbench near the lawn tools and stood very still in the dim, cold light of the garage. On the shelf above the toolbox were the things he had built this house around without ever saying so out loud. A photo of his father beside the shop sign that once read Turner and Son Auto, his old timing light, the cracked leather gloves his father wore through winters when money was too tight for heat and pride was too stubborn for complaint. He took out his phone again and called Vivian. Straight to voicemail. He called once more. Then a third time. Finally, a new text. Don't do this. I'm serious. I need distance. Stay somewhere else tonight. We can talk when you calm down. He stared at the screen until the words blurred. Then, slowly, his gaze moved back to the driveway, to the white Range Rover. And for the first time that night, something in him shifted from hurt to clarity. Because Vivian had made one mistake beneath all the others. She had locked the wrong man out, and she had sold the wrong car. But worst of all for her, she had forgotten whose name was on the new one. 6 years earlier, before the locks and the text and the empty space in the driveway, Vivian Cole had walked into Turner and Son Auto in a raincoat the color of wet ivory and looked entirely misplaced among the lifts, chains, socket trays, and old radio music. Elias remembered the day because his father was still alive then, and because Vivian had stood in the service bay doorway holding the keys to a dying BMW like she had wandered into a country she did not mean to insult but certainly did not plan to respect. "Is someone here named Turner?" she had asked. Elias, 38 then and grease up to both wrists, leaned out from beneath a pickup truck and said, "Depends which one you're mad at." She blinked, then laughed. Not because it was especially funny, because she was pretty enough to know laughter could open doors. Her car needed a water pump, 2 hoses, and honesty. Vivian wanted speed, courtesy, and the kind of gentle treatment beautiful women mistake for competence until they've been cheated by enough men in pressed shirts. Elias gave her the repair quote, explained the labor, pointed out the cracked housing himself, and when she squinted at the engine like she might personally argue the broken part back into working order, he smiled in spite of himself. "You can trust me," he told her. Later, he would hate how simply those words had come. At the time, though, it seemed easy. Vivian sold entry-level houses for a brokerage that liked young women with good teeth and expensive heels. Elias repaired transmissions, alternators, engines, and occasionally men's illusions. She called his work fascinating, in the way people call storms beautiful from indoors. He found her sharp, ambitious, and slightly out of her natural habitat in Belridge, a town where old money hid behind church donations and new money hid behind SUVs with tinted glass. His father, Ray Turner, disliked her immediately. Not loudly. Ray Turner rarely raised his voice when a silence could do more damage. But after Vivian's third visit to the shop, after Elias began washing his hands twice before answering her calls and switching shirts before dinner, Ray looked up from a carburetor and said, "That one doesn't love anything she can't display." Elias laughed it off. Because sons are rarely wiser than fathers at the right time. Because love always sounds defensive before it sounds foolish. And because Vivian, in those days, still knew how to mimic tenderness when ambition was tired. She listened when Elias talked about his father's old shop. She touched the half-restored Chevelle with reverence she did not yet resent. She brought sandwiches once for both men and somehow remembered Ray took mustard, not mayo. She stood beside Elias under the 4th of July lights downtown and said, with her head on his shoulder, "I've never met someone who makes hard work look clean." He married her 14 months later. Ray attended the wedding in a gray suit that fit poorly and looked at his son, as though he were watching a man step willingly onto ice that had not yet decided whether it would hold. Vivian cried beautiful tears. Elias believed them. For a while, there was no reason not to. She moved into his house on Maple Crest Drive, the one they bought partly with his savings and partly with an inheritance Vivian received from an aunt she had visited exactly twice in 10 years but mourned lavishly once the money cleared. She repainted the kitchen white, replaced the curtains, installed drawer organizers, threw away his old coffee mugs because they looked tired, and began introducing the place to guests as our home, with subtle emphasis that always made Elias feel both included and corrected. The first 2 years were not bad. Not really. That was the problem. Bad marriages rarely begin with visible villainy. They begin with little permissions. The first contemptuous joke forgiven too quickly. The first expense rationalized because she was stressed. The first evening she came home late smelling of expensive perfume and a client dinner and rolled her eyes when he asked if she'd eaten. The first time she called the Chevelle that toy, and he laughed instead of saying no. Elias kept the shop running. When Ray died of a heart attack at 68 beside lift number 2, Elias buried him on a Thursday and reopened the garage Monday because grief, in men like him, often disguises itself as labor. Vivian wore black beautifully at the funeral and held his arm like a dutiful wife before whispering in the kitchen 3 days later. You can't keep working yourself to death over a place that smells like rust and old men. Elias did not answer. Not because he agreed. Because he knew she would hear disagreement as insult. And that became the shape of it. He yielded in small places. She expanded there. When her credit cratered after a disastrous attempt to launch a boutique staging company with a friend who vanished alongside most of the inventory and 3 unpaid vendor invoices, Elias paid off the worst of the debt. When Vivian said real estate clients expected a certain image and her old Lexus looked like someone gave up halfway through wealth, he used his business credit to finance the white Range Rover she insisted would change everything. It's just paper, he told his banker friend. She'll drive it. I'll pay it. The loan went through under Elias Turner alone. Insurance named Vivian as an approved driver. Registration listed Elias as owner. The monthly payments drafted from Turner Auto's business account. Vivian drove it home that day with her sunglasses on and her window down, calling it my Rover before the engine had cooled. Elias let her. Because marriage, he thought, was not made of paperwork. Because he was tired. Because men who know exactly how machines fail are often heartbreakingly naive about how people do. By the 5th year, Vivian had become very good at treating sacrifice as atmosphere. Invisible, expected, always there until it wasn't. She upgraded her wardrobe, joined a better brokerage, stopped inviting Elias to certain client dinners because his work shirts sent the wrong message, began speaking about the shop as though it were temporary, embarrassing, or at the very least something to be translated into cleaner language when she was in rooms with higher ceilings. My husband owns an automotive business, she would say. Never, my husband fixes what breaks. Never. My husband buried his father and kept the family place alive with hands that ache in the rain. Just automotive business, as if grease could be made respectable if phrased abstractly enough. Elias noticed. He also noticed her phone tipping face down more often. The new perfume, the way she inspected him before events like a woman assessing whether a companion would lower resale value. He noticed and told himself stories. She's stressed. The market's hard. You're both tired. Every marriage changes. That is how good men talk themselves out of obvious pain. They call it complexity until the injury has roots. Then came the night she laughed at the Chevelle. Not casually. Not in passing. They were at a fundraiser for the Belridge Children's Foundation, one of those wine and auction events where Vivian thrived and Elias stood near the back, trying not to touch anything too expensive. A man named Carter Wells, developer, donor, hair too perfect to trust, asked about the car when Vivian mentioned Elias Restored Classics. Oh God, not the Chevelle, she had said with a bright smile. If you ever need to punish him, just threaten the garage. Carter laughed. Several others did too. Elias stood there holding a sweating glass of bad Chardonnay while the room made his father's car into a marital punchline. On the drive home he said, quietly, "Don't do that again." Vivian kept her eyes on the road. Do what? Use me for a laugh. She sighed, long and practiced. Elias, if you're going to be this sensitive every time I make a joke, I honestly don't know how to help you. It was a sentence she used often in later years. Not I'm sorry. Never that. Always I don't know how to help you, which converted her cruelty into his deficiency. He should have left then. Instead, he rebuilt a transmission, paid another insurance premium, changed the brake pads on the Range Rover, and hoped kindness would eventually shame contempt into tenderness. It never does. Contempt, once comfortable, only gets hungrier. The first person Elias called was not a lawyer. It was his sister. Mara answered on the second ring, voice thick with sleep and immediate alarm. Elias! He sat on an overturned bucket in the cold garage with his duffel at his boots and said the sentence slowly, as if hearing it aloud might make it less absurd. She changed the locks, and she sold the Chevelle. There was a silence so complete he thought the call had dropped. Then Mara said, with terrifying calm, I'm coming. She arrived 22 minutes later in flannel pajama pants beneath a wool coat, her brown hair shoved into a knot and murder already in her stride. At 46, Mara Bennett had spent 20 years as an emergency room nurse and had the particular authority of women who no longer confuse composure with passivity. She parked crooked, crossed the driveway without greeting the house, and pulled her younger brother into a hug so hard his breath caught. Then she stepped back and said, Where is she? Elias gave a tired laugh. Inside. Being right, probably. Mara looked toward the lit windows. I can fix that. No. Elias. No scenes. She sold Dad's car. The correction hit him like a bruise. Not just the Chevelle. Dad's car. Yes. Mara knew it too. She had cried the first night Elias got the engine to turn over after restoration, because Ray Turner had driven that Chevelle to her senior prom and to the hospital when their mother died and to every church fundraiser he claimed not to enjoy. The car was family memory with chrome and headers. Elias rubbed both hands over his face. She texted. Said she needed space. Mara's expression hardened past anger into contempt. She needed space, so she committed theft? Elias looked up. You think it counts? Did she have title in her name? No. Did you authorize the sale? No. Then unless marriage has become a magical defense for fraud since Tuesday, yes. He blinked. You sound like Nora. At that, Mara's mouth changed. Nora Bennett, no relation, despite Belridge being small enough to reuse names, had been Elias's closest friend before life and pride and bad timing had pulled them into separate orbits. She had grown up 3 streets over, once ridden with him in the Chevelle when it was still primer gray and coughing, and was now the sort of divorce attorney who wore sensible heels, devastating patience, and an engagement ring to no one. Mara pulled out her phone. I'm calling her. It's midnight. Yes, Mara said. And my brother is sitting in his garage because his wife is trash in expensive moisturizer. 5 minutes later, Nora Bennett was awake, alert, and asking precise questions in the tone of a woman who had heard too many emotional catastrophes to be distracted by their theatrical elements. Start at the beginning, she said. Not the marriage. Tonight. So Elias did. The new lock, the text, the missing Chevelle, the bags in the garage. He could hear Nora typing. Then she asked, What about the house? Deeds in both names. Mortgage. In both names. Good. She cannot legally evict you from jointly owned property by swapping hardware store brass and a mean text message. She changed the locks. I gathered. There was the sound of a drawer opening on her end. Probably pens. Nora liked pens the way priests like ritual. Do not try to force entry tonight, she said. Do not break windows, kick doors, yell through mail slots, or become the sort of man she can describe creatively later. Elias exhaled slowly. Wasn't planning to. Good. Second. Do you have the title to the Chevelle? In the house safe. Combination. He named it. Mara winced. You never changed it? She knew it already. Elias, Mara said. Nora cut in. Check something for me. The Range Rover, whose name is on title and loan. For the first time that night, Elias looked toward the white SUV with something other than disgust. Mine, he said. Mara's eyes lifted. Nora paused. Then, in a tone so mild it was almost holy, she asked, Solely? Yes. Loan, registration, insurance policy, all of it. Turner Auto account pays the note. Nora made a thoughtful sound. Mara began to smile. A very dangerous smile. Interesting, Nora said. Elias leaned forward. You think. I think, Nora replied. That before sunrise you need digital copies of every document related to that vehicle. Purchase contract, registration, insurance declarations, loan statement, payment history, anything showing ownership. Then tomorrow morning, I want you at my office by 9. Okay. And Elias? Yeah. If she sold the Chevelle without your authorization, do not warn her what's coming next. He looked again through the side window of the garage toward the house. At the glow. At the vague movement of shadow behind curtains. At the woman who had once told him he made hard work look clean and had now boxed his life into luggage and plastic bags. What if she thinks I won't do anything? He asked quietly. Nora's voice sharpened by half a degree. Then let surprise carry some of the weight you have been carrying alone. Elias did not sleep much. Mara insisted he come to her house, but he refused to leave the property entirely. Pride, maybe, or the simple, stubborn animal instinct of not wanting the home to feel fully surrendered overnight. He dozed for an hour or two on a folding camp cot in the garage office where he used to keep polishing compound, extra rags, and paperwork for the lawn service. At 6:30, before Vivian woke, he walked around the back of the house to the basement window he had once installed himself. The latch had always stuck. He knew exactly how far to lift, then tap. 3 minutes later he was inside. Not sneaking, reclaiming. He did not go upstairs. He moved through the dim basement with a flashlight between his teeth, climbed the utility steps, and opened the small wall safe hidden behind a framed print Vivian always said looked too farmhouse for the room. Inside, passports, deed copies, old tax returns, their marriage certificate, and the envelope file labeled vehicles in Elias's square block handwriting. He took the whole file. Then another marked Turner Auto/Loan. Then his birth certificate, the spare set of shop ledgers, and the flash drive where he backed up scanned business records every quarter. Upstairs, a floorboard creaked. Vivian. Elias froze, but the house remained quiet. He let himself out the same way he came in. At 7:15, he sat in Mara's kitchen with coffee too hot to taste and spread the documents across the table. Mara, already in hospital scrubs, stood over him with crossed arms while he organized everything into piles. There it was. White Range Rover, model year new enough to smell smug. Owner, Elias Turner. Lien holder, First South Credit Union. Primary insured, Elias Turner. Additional driver, Vivian Turner. Payment source, Turner Auto operating account. Mara let out a low whistle. She really forgot. Elias stared at the paper. No, he said after a moment. She just stopped respecting details that didn't flatter her. By 9 sharp, Nora Bennett had every document in a neat stack, tabs already emerging like quiet knives between pages. Her office overlooked Main Street above an insurance agency and a florist. Everything in it was organized, sunlit, and slightly intimidating, which suited her. Nora herself looked exactly like a woman who billed by the hour and remembered every human weakness that ever tried to become a legal strategy against her. Dark hair in a low twist, navy suit, no nonsense, eyes too intelligent to flatter. She read the file on the Chevelle sale first, or rather, the absence of one. Do you know where she sold it? She asked. Elias nodded. Text came from an unknown number after hers. It said, car picked up. Pleasure doing business. Attached a bill of lading from Belridge Specialty Transport. Nora's brows lifted. Forward it to me. He did. She scanned the document. This is a broker pickup. She may have sold it through a dealer or private intermediary. Nora looked up. Did she have access to the title? Yes. Could she forge your signature convincingly? Mara answered before Elias could. No. But she could forge it confidently. Nora almost smiled. Sometimes that's enough. She flipped to the Rover paperwork, then leaned back. Well, she said softly. This part is easy. Elias met her gaze. Can I take it? You can recover your own vehicle from an unauthorized user if you do it lawfully and without breaching the peace, Nora said. Given the house issue, I'd prefer witnesses. Preferably law enforcement nearby or a licensed recovery service. If she contests it publicly, Even better for documentation. Mara sat forward. Do it at one of her open houses. Nora looked at her. Mara shrugged. What? I contain multitudes. Elias rubbed his jaw. I don't want revenge. Mara made a sound. Nora ignored her. Then what do you want? He took a breath. My car back. Good, Nora said. That helps. We stay focused. She slid a yellow legal pad toward him. Here is the order. First, I file emergency notice regarding unlawful lockout on jointly owned marital residence. Second, we report the unauthorized sale of the Chevelle. Third, you remove Vivian from insurance coverage effective today. Fourth, you recover the Rover. Not to punish her. To stop liability exposure and remind everyone in this county that ownership is not decided by aesthetics. Mara leaned back, satisfied. Elias glanced down the list. Then up. What if she cries? Nora's expression did not change. Then Belridge will survive its first public tears. Vivian Turner spent Friday afternoon inside a 3-story colonial on Ashby Lane, pretending she was still in control of her life. The house belonged to a surgeon and his wife who were relocating to Nashville. It had white-paneled walls, arched doorways, a kitchen bigger than Elias's entire shop office, and the sort of professionally staged calm that suggested no one had ever argued there in socks. Vivian loved open houses because they were performance disguised as employment. She loved the polished bowls of green apples, the folded throw blankets, the delicate lie that beauty and order could be arranged for a weekend and then called a home. She loved people looking at her and seeing not effort, not debt, not insecurity, not the girl from a cramped duplex off Willow Street whose mother taught piano in the dining room to pay the light bill, but success. By 3 o'clock she had already handed out 12 brochures, smiled through 2 insulting questions about square footage, and told 3 separate women that the mudroom cabinetry was European-inspired, though she had no idea what that meant. Her phone buzzed twice with missed calls from Patricia at the brokerage. She ignored them. There had been enough drama this week. She knew Elias would calm down. That was the arrogance of the cruel. They mistake restraint for surrender because they have so often benefited from it. She had not expected him to do nothing forever. She had simply expected him to do nothing first. The Chevelle money had cleared faster than she thought. A collector intermediary out of Lexington wired the deposit that morning after Belridge Specialty collected the car the previous night. It wasn't the full amount she wanted. Old cars, she privately believed, were only worthwhile if someone rich enough wanted them. But it was enough to cover her staging credit card and the deposit for the condo she had already viewed downtown. She told herself Elias would understand eventually. Or if not understand, adapt. He loved hardship almost superstitiously. He would make meaning out of loss if given enough time. She was on her second flute of complimentary sparkling water when a silver tow truck rolled slowly up Ashby Lane and stopped in front of the house. At first she barely noticed. Then she saw the lettering on the side. Turner Auto Recovery. Her stomach tightened. No, not possible. The driver's door opened. Elias stepped out wearing a clean dark coat over a black button-down. Not his usual work shirt. Nora Bennett came around the other side in navy and winter light, carrying a leather folio. Behind them, to Vivian's growing disbelief, pulled a sheriff's cruiser. 2 guests near the front walkway paused mid-conversation. One of them looked from the tow truck to the white Range Rover parked at the curb with a little frown of scandalized interest. Vivian was already moving before she consciously decided to. She opened the front door, descended the brick steps, and kept her smile in place because there were clients behind her and one thing she knew better than love was audience management. "What is this?" she asked brightly. Elias stopped 3 feet from her. He looked rested in the dangerous way men sometimes do after grief becomes decision. Not calm, past calm. His face had that clean, sharpened stillness forged by sleeplessness and clarity. "Afternoon, Viv," he said. She hated when he called her that in public. It made them sound familiar when she now needed distance to be the narrative. "You can't come here," she said softly through her smile. "I'm working." Nora stepped in before Elias answered. "Mrs. Turner, I'm Nora Bennett, counsel for your husband. We are here to recover a vehicle titled solely in Mr. Turner's name. Vivian blinked, then laughed. Actually laughed. You cannot be serious. Deputy Warren Mills, who had known Elias since Little League and Vivian, since she used to skip church with theater makeup still on, stood by the cruiser with the exhausted look of a man who had already predicted how this afternoon would trend through town. Vivian lowered her voice. Elias, don't embarrass yourself. He glanced at the Rover, then back at her. You sold my car. She straightened. Our car. No, my car. It was marital property. Nora opened the folio. Not according to title and restoration records predating the marriage. Vivian's smile thinned. Fine, she snapped. Then we'll discuss all of this with attorneys. Not in front of strangers. Nora nodded pleasantly. We are. A couple on the walkway pretended very badly not to listen. Vivian's cheeks colored. The Rover is mine. Elias held out the registration copy. No, it's driven by you. Owned by me. Something like real panic flickered now. She looked at the paper, then at him. That's ridiculous. You insisted on it being in my name when your credit tanked, he said. Remember? Said paperwork didn't matter as long as the seats were cream leather. Deputy Mills coughed into one fist. Vivian looked toward him. You're seriously going to stand there? Mills tipped his hat back. Ma'am, vehicle registration lists Mr. Elias Turner as sole owner. If he wants it recovered, that's a civilly prudent decision, especially since insurance coverage changed at noon. The last line hit her harder than everything else. You removed me? Elias met her gaze evenly. You locked me out. Her voice dropped. So this is punishment. No, he said. This is paperwork. For a second, Vivian looked as though she might slap him. Instead, she turned to Nora. You people think this is funny? Nora's expression was mild. No. Expensive, certainly, but not funny. At the curb, one of Vivian's potential buyers subtly stepped away from the Rover. Another guest whispered something into his wife's ear. A third lifted his phone, then lowered it when Elias looked over. Vivian felt the room of the afternoon tilt beneath her. This is my client event, she hissed. And that, Elias replied, is my vehicle. He nodded once to the tow truck driver, one of his senior mechanics from the shop, a quiet man named Theo who had likely never in his life enjoyed a workplace task this much. Theo approached the Rover with the spare key fob Elias handed him. The locks chirped. Vivian took one involuntary step forward. Don't you dare. Elias didn't move. Theo opened the door, started the engine, and drove the Rover gently onto the angled bed with all the respectful care of a man loading someone else's pride into public consequence. The hydraulic lift whined. Metal clicked. The white SUV rose 2 feet off the street. A woman on the path let out a tiny gasp of delighted horror. Vivian turned back to Elias, finally dropping the performance entirely. You are unbelievable. His voice stayed quiet. No, I was believable for too long. That landed. Not because it was loud, because it was true. Nora handed Vivian an envelope. Inside you'll find formal notice regarding the unlawful exclusion from the marital residence, preservation of assets, and a request for immediate disclosure concerning the location and terms of sale of the 1969 Chevelle. Failure to comply will widen this unpleasant afternoon into several more. Vivian snatched the envelope. This isn't over. Elias nodded toward the departing tow truck. Neither was that loan. You just kept forgetting. She stared at him, furious and suddenly unsure, because the man in front of her was still Elias. Same broad shoulders, same working hands, same unflashy jacket. But he was no longer asking her to see him. He was simply proceeding without her permission. And there is nothing more destabilizing to a person who lives on control than the moment someone stops offering their dignity up for negotiation. The tow truck rolled away with the Rover gleaming on its back like an insult made visible. The sheriff's cruiser followed. Nora stepped aside to take a call. For one suspended second, it was just husband and wife on the walkway of a house neither of them belonged in. Vivian's voice changed then, softened around the edges in the way it used to when she needed him pliable. You could have called me first. Elias looked at her and saw, not for the first time but perhaps for the clearest, that she still believed process was the wound, not betrayal. You sold my father's car, he said. Her mouth tightened. It was just a car. Something old and final went still in him. No, he said. It was the last thing in my life you couldn't turn into decor. Then he turned and walked back to his truck. This time he did not look back. By Monday morning, Belridge had selected a version of the story it found most delicious. Some said Elias had caught Vivian cheating and repossessed the Rover in front of million-dollar clients. Some said she had stolen from him. Some said he had finally snapped, which people love saying about patient men because it turns accumulated injury into sudden drama. By lunch, a blurry photo of the white Rover on the flatbed had made it onto 2 private neighborhood Facebook groups and 1 church chain text under the heading proof that pride comes before a toe. Vivian missed 3 showings and gained exactly 0 sympathy. Elias ignored all of it. He was busy tracking the Chevelle. The intermediary listed on the bill of lading turned out to be Blue Ridge Classic Exchange, a brokerage out of Lexington with a nice website, dubious ethics, and precisely the kind of salesman who began every sentence with "I'm sure this is all a misunderstanding." Nora corrected him within 90 seconds. The title transfer, once examined, showed a forged signature crude enough to insult both penmanship and fraud. Blue Ridge had accepted digital copies, partial verification, and a seller representation signed by Vivian stating she had authority under marital asset provisions to sell the vehicle on Elias's behalf. She lied, Elias said flatly. The salesman sighed. Sir, we transact in good faith. Nora leaned toward speakerphone and said, Then I encourage you to locate that faith quickly, because my next call is to the State Fraud Division. 3 hours later, they had the buyer's information. Name, Walter Gresham. Location, outside Louisville. Retired contractor, widower, collector of late 60s muscle cars. The good news: the Chevelle had not yet been resold. The bad news: under Kentucky commercial law, unraveling the sale would require either voluntary cooperation or a court order, because Walter Gresham had likely purchased in good faith. Elias sat in Nora's office with the buyer file in both hands and felt something like despair begin to edge into the room. He could handle anger. He could even handle betrayal. But helplessness had always been harder. It's gone, he said quietly. Nora studied him. No, she said. Not yet. Even if I win later, even if a judge agrees, it could be months. That is possible. He leaned back in the chair, stared at the ceiling, and closed his eyes once. The last time he had seen the Chevelle was Thursday night. Waxed, covered, secure in the detached garage. The keys hanging on the pegboard near his old torque wrench. His father's initials still scratched faintly under the trunk lid. The stitched tear in the driver's seat he never fixed because Ray's belt buckle made it the summer before Mara's wedding, and somehow that damage felt like proof of life, not ruin. Nora's voice softened, which she used sparingly and therefore with effect. You could call him. Elias opened his eyes. The buyer. Yes. He won't care. Maybe not. Maybe he's delighted. Maybe he's an S. But right now all you know is he bought a car. You don't know if he bought your history on purpose. Mara, who had come straight from a night shift and was now eating crackers from Nora's secretary's stash as if litigation were a sport, nodded. Call him. So Elias did. Walter Gresham answered on the 4th ring, sounding exactly like a man one would expect to own 3 classic cars, a woodshop, and at least one opinion about modern country music. Yeah. Elias introduced himself, then said, I believe you bought my Chevelle. A pause. Then, the blue SS from Belridge? Elias swallowed. Yeah. Another pause. When Walter spoke again, his tone had changed. Less guarded. More interested. You sayin' it wasn't the wife's to sell? Yes. Well, Walter said slowly. That makes sense of some things. Elias sat up. What things? Mostly that the woman on the phone knew less about the car than my dentist, but kept saying money was urgent and she needed it gone before the sentimental part started. Mara muttered something profane under her breath. Walter continued, I asked about the build sheet. She sent the wrong VIN twice. Figured she was just the kind of person who'd inherit a good thing and not understand it. Elias closed his eyes briefly. No, he said. She understood. She just didn't care. Walter made a low sound. Well, he said, I care. Been restoring cars 30 years. Men like me know the difference between somebody selling metal and somebody selling grief. The room stilled. Elias said nothing. Walter continued in the plain, unadorned way of older men who don't dramatize decency because they've practiced it too long. Bring your paperwork, he said. Come to Louisville tomorrow. If the title's dirty, I'll unwind with the broker and you can buy back your own damn car for exactly what I paid. Elias let out a breath he did not know he was holding. You'd do that? Walter snorted. Son, I bought a machine, not another man's father. Vivian spent the same Monday in a condo showroom trying to convince herself Elias had overplayed his hand. That was what she told Patricia at the brokerage when Patricia finally cornered her in the conference room with a printed photo of the Rover on the flatbed and the tight expression of a woman calculating liability. This was personal, Vivian said. He's trying to humiliate me because I asked for space. Patricia folded the photo once, neatly. Did you lock him out? Vivian crossed her arms. I changed the locks because I did not feel safe. The lie came easily. Not because she had no conscience. Because she had always believed intention mattered more than accuracy if the emotional story was right. Patricia tilted her head. Did you file a police report? No. Did you seek a protective order? No. Did he threaten you? Vivian looked away. Patricia sighed. Belridge Fine Properties had tolerated many things from top producers over the years. Vanity, creative expense accounts, occasional affairs, clients who disappeared with wine glasses from showings. But public scandal was different, especially when it included a tow truck, a deputy, and a husband known around town as patient to the point of sainthood. That video is circulating, Patricia said. Vivian's stomach dropped. What video? The one of the recovery. Someone had filmed it. Of course they had. Patricia slid her phone across the table. The clip was short, slightly shaky, and clear enough to be fatal. The white Rover climbing the bed. Deputy Mills standing nearby. Vivian on the walkway in cream heels, furious and disbelieving. Elias in profile, calm as weather. And the caption already gathering comments. Turns out her car wasn't hers after all. Vivian stared at the screen. Heat climbed her neck. This is unbelievable. Patricia's voice remained measured. What is unbelievable is that you apparently sold your husband's vehicle without confirming title. Vivian snapped her head up. You heard that from him? I heard that from my attorney after the broker called to ask whether Belridge Fine Properties wished to comment on one of its agents being connected to a disputed classic car sale. For the first time since Thursday night, true fear entered. Not domestic drama fear, professional fear, because marriage can be rewritten in social circles. Fraud cannot. Patricia stood. You are off client-facing duties until further notice. Vivian rose too. You can't do that. I can, Patricia said. And if this worsens, I will. When Vivian got back to the condo she had nearly leased, the one with glass balcony rails, soulless lighting, and views marketed as urban sophistication, she found the first official envelope from Nora Bennett already wedged under the door. Inside were notices, disclosures, and a tone so dispassionately lethal it made Vivian sit down on the bare floor and read everything twice. Unauthorized lockout. Preservation of marital assets. Demand for location and sale proceeds of the Chevelle. Request for all communications relating to transfer. Notice regarding temporary removal of her from the insurance policy on the Rover. Notice of intent to file. It was the final page that made her hands tremble. Please be advised that unlawful disposition of separately titled property may expose the transferring party to civil and criminal consequences, including fraud, conversion, and forgery-related claims, depending on the method of transfer. Vivian let the pages fall. The room around her was too clean, too empty. The air conditioning hummed too even. For the first time, the story she had been telling herself began to wobble. She had not meant for this to become legal. She had meant to shock Elias into movement. To force a separation before he could argue her down with quiet disappointment. To take money from a car he cared about more than he cared about appearances and redirect it toward the life she believed she deserved. That was how she saw it. Necessary. Corrective. Practical. But the law, she was now discovering, had no appetite for emotional editing. She called Brent Lawson. He answered with the bored warmth of a man who liked women most when they came polished and unencumbered. Brent was a regional sales director for a luxury development firm, and exactly the sort of man who made Vivian feel she had not imagined herself upward for nothing. He wore cufflinks on weekdays, touched the small of her back too casually at events, and had once told her over martinis that marriage, for some people, is just a draft copy of their real life. Vivian had not slept with him. Not technically, but she had let herself be admired by him in ways that belonged to the same neighborhood as betrayal. Now she said, "I think Elias is filing something." Brent was quiet for half a second too long. "About the car?" "About everything." A longer pause. "Vivian," Brent said carefully, "I told you to make sure the title was clean." "No, you told me married assets are usually shared." "I told you to ask your lawyer." She closed her eyes. Of course. Men like Brent never stand near a fire long enough to smell like smoke later. "What do I do?" His answer came instantly, and because of that, honestly. "Distance yourself." Took her a second to understand. Then another. "You mean from him?" "I mean from the situation. Let attorneys handle it. Don't text anything emotional. Don't show up at his business. And for the love of God, don't admit fault in writing." She hung up on him, then sat on the empty condo floor until dusk bled up the windows and finally admitted to herself the thing she hated most. She had not married a fool. She had married a patient man. And patient men, when they finally stop absorbing injury, often become the most dangerous kind. Not explosive, not cruel, just finished. Walter Gresham lived on 3 acres outside Louisville in a low brick ranch with a detached metal building bigger than most churches in Belridge. Inside were 3 cars under covers, 1 spotless tool chest, a coffee maker that looked older than the moon, and Elias's Chevelle. Blue. Perfect. Still wearing the Turner auto tag frame. Elias stopped in the open doorway and for one terrible second could not move closer because relief hurts too. Walter, a broad man in his 70s with suspenders and a beard like steel wool, stood beside the car holding a folder of sale documents and regarding Elias with the steady, measuring gaze of someone who trusted people only after watching how they looked at machines. "Well," Walter said, "that's either your car or you're the most convincing liar I've met this quarter." Elias walked forward slowly and laid one hand on the fender. The metal was cool. Real. He bent and looked under the trunk lip. There, faint and scratched where no broker, thief, or careless wife would ever notice. The initials Ray Turner carved after the final paint. RT plus ET. His throat tightened so fast it nearly shut. "Yeah," he said, voice rough. "That's mine." Walter handed him the folder. The forged signature was ugly. Even uglier in person. "She told the broker her husband was out of state and wanted a fast cash sale," Walter said. "Said there'd been an emotional death in the family, and she couldn't bear looking at the car." Elias let out a short, humorless sound. "That part's almost true." Walter nodded once. "Truth is what liars use for grip." Elias looked around the shop. "You got a nice place here." Walter shrugged. "Wife liked me home after retirement. I told her if I didn't build a workshop, one of us would not survive all the togetherness." His face changed, a shadow passing through it. "She died 3 years ago. Kept the shop. Easier to hear myself think with metal around." Elias nodded. Some men do not need more words to understand one another. Walter looked at the Chevelle again. "She told me the car belonged to her late father." Elias stared, then laughed once in genuine disbelief. "My late father. That's original." Walter snorted. "I figured if she lied that quick, there'd be more underneath." Nora had come along and now stepped forward, file in hand. Her presence in Walter's shop seemed faintly improbable, like a federal statute wandering through a county fair, but she wore it well. "We can unwind the sale formally," she said. Blue Ridge has agreed to refund your payment pending return. We'll pursue them and Mrs. Turner separately for associated costs. Walter waved a hand. I'm not worried about costs. He looked at Elias. You married long? 6 years. Walter grunted. Then you already paid. The older man left them alone with the car for a minute. Elias slid into the driver's seat. The leather still carried the faint smell of oil and old vinyl, and the cedar block he kept under the bench in winter. His father's steering wheel cover. The tiny crack near the dash edge that he never repaired. The gear shift polished by hands now dead and his own hands afterward. He put both palms on the wheel and shut his eyes. Memory came hard. Ray laughing only once in a blue moon but meaning it fully. Ray leaning in the shop doorway with a cigarette he swore he had quit. Ray saying after Elias finished the restoration, "Well, she sounds like herself again." And Elias, like a younger fool, having believed the car would outlast every other breakable thing in his life because he had rebuilt it right. Nora stood quietly outside the open driver door until he looked up. "You okay?" she asked. He nodded, then shook his head, then laughed a little because sometimes truth arrives requiring both. "She called it nostalgia," he said. Nora's expression hardened with a very specific sort of anger, one she reserved for people who mistook devotion for weakness. "Well," she said, "today nostalgia is legally recoverable." He got out, walked once around the Chevelle, and touched the rear quarter panel like a man checking pulse. Walter came back carrying 3 mugs of coffee. "You taking her home today?" he asked. Elias looked at the car, then at Nora, then at Walter. "Yes," he said. Walter nodded like that was the only acceptable answer. "Good. Some things you don't leave overnight once you get 'em back." Before they left, Walter did one more thing Elias would think about for years. He opened his own wallet, took out a photo and handed it over. It showed a much younger Walter beside a red GTO and a boy of maybe 16 grinning in the passenger seat. "My son," Walter said, "died at 28. Overdose." He took the picture back carefully. "I still keep that car because when I drive it, I can almost remember him before shame got louder than sense." Elias said nothing. Walter slipped the photo back into his wallet. "People who've never needed an object to hold memory together will always call it just a car," he said. "Don't waste your breath teaching them otherwise." Then he pointed toward the Chevelle. "Drive." When Elias brought the Chevelle back into Belridge, he did not drive it past the house. He took it straight to the shop. Theo and Ben, his 2 senior mechanics, came out from under a lifted Tacoma like men hearing church bells. Ben actually removed his cap. Theo circled the car once and shook his head. "Boss, if you'd told me we were rescuing sacred property, I'd have worn better boots." Elias smiled for the first time in days. They parked the Chevelle in Bay 4 behind closed doors. Elias kept the keys in his pocket. Only after that did he turn his attention back to the house. The hearing on temporary occupancy and unlawful exclusion was short, ugly, and illuminating. Vivian arrived in ivory, which Nora later described as a bold choice for someone under forgery-related scrutiny. Her attorney, a thin man from Lexington with expensive hair and a strategic misunderstanding of small-town judges, argued that Vivian had changed the locks for emotional safety, not exclusion, and that the marriage had become untenable due to Elias's obsessive attachment to personal property and emotionally unavailable behavior. Elias might have laughed if he weren't so tired. Judge Helena Morse did not laugh. She was 62, widowed, and famous across 3 counties for once fining a man extra because he rolled his eyes during testimony. She reviewed the lock change, the text message, the joint deed, and the fact that Vivian had not sought any protective order or police intervention before removing her husband's access to jointly owned property. Then she looked over her glasses and said, "Mrs. Turner, wanting distance does not empower you to convert marriage into a gated community." Vivian went red. Her attorney tried again with softer language. Judge Morse shut that down too. The order was simple. Elias was restored immediate access to the marital home pending further proceedings. Neither party could dispose of major assets. Communication was to occur through counsel where possible. Temporary financial disclosures were due within 10 days. Vivian left the courtroom with her jaw tight enough to crack. Out in the hall, as Nora packed her files, Vivian stopped in front of Elias. Not close enough to touch. Close enough to perform. "You're enjoying this," she said quietly. He looked at her. Past the makeup. Past the control. Past the woman he had once mistaken for kind because her beauty came with careful hands and voice lowering at the right moments. "No," he said. "I'm just done carrying both sides of your choices." She laughed bitterly. "You always wanted to be the martyr." Nora stepped between them before Elias could answer. "Mrs. Turner, if you have anything to say relevant to litigation, say it through me. If you have anything else to say, discover silence. It may improve your outcomes generally." Vivian stared at her. "Did you always hate me?" Nora smiled faintly. "No. At first I found you temporary. That one landed hard." Vivian turned and walked away in dangerous, careful heels. Elias watched her go with something that no longer felt like love's opposite. Felt older, clearer, like grief after denial burns off. When he returned to the house that evening with the court order in his pocket, he expected battle. Instead, he found emptiness. Vivian had taken clothes, shoes, cosmetics, framed photos she preferred herself in, and all the better cookware. She left the dining chairs, the couch, 3 dead houseplants, and the expensive cream throw she used to drape artfully over the arm of the reading chair without ever reading there. Upstairs, the closet was half bare. The bathroom drawers were light. On her vanity, one lipstick remained like an abandoned accusation. Elias stood in the bedroom doorway and realized he felt less rage than relief. Because there is a particular exhaustion in living beside contempt and waiting for it to become temporary. Once it leaves, the silence is not always lonely. Sometimes it is just quiet. In the garage, the empty space where the Chevelle had been no longer hurt in the same way because the car was safe. But another absence remained. The workbench drawer where he kept certain tools and envelopes now held only screws. He opened the filing cabinet. Several statements missing. Business checkbook register gone. He went still. Then called Nora. "She took financial records," he said. Nora did not sound surprised. "Of course she did. Freeze online account permissions tonight. Every login. Every card. Every transfer authority." "And Elias?" "Yeah. Make a list of everything that feels small enough not to matter. People like Vivian do their most expensive damage there." The bank found the first irregularity. $32,000 transferred over 7 months from the Turner Auto operating account into what appeared to be a vendor account named VDC Consulting. Elias had never heard of VDC Consulting. The second irregularity was uglier. 2 cashier's checks, both under the reporting threshold that would have triggered automatic review, used toward a luxury condo deposit, the same condo Vivian had nearly taken downtown. The third made him sit down. A personal guarantee form, partially completed but not filed, naming Elias Turner as backup guarantor on a line of credit connected to a startup development venture associated with Brent Lawson's firm. His signature was not there, but copies of his tax returns and business statements had been attached. Nora read the file and went very still. "Someone was preparing to volunteer you into debt," she said. Elias stared at the papers. For the first time, Brent Lawson became more than a cologne cloud and too white smile from cocktail events Vivian made him attend. "Who is he?" Nora asked. "Regional sales director. Big on cuffs and handshakes." "And your wife knows him how?" Elias looked at the documents, then away. "Too well." Nora did not push. She only organized the pages into a new stack labeled potential fraud/financial exposure. By then, even Mara, who had advocated flamethrower-level emotional resolution from the beginning, looked shaken. "She was going to use your business to fund an exit," Mara said quietly. Elias nodded once. It explained things retroactively in brutal ways. Vivian's sudden interest in account passwords. Her questions about business insurance. The times she asked whether Turner Auto's line of credit could be restructured if they ever wanted to diversify. He had thought it was boredom with his work, the way she prodded around finances like someone inspecting plumbing she didn't plan to pay for. But now he saw strategy in it. Not because she was some grand criminal mastermind. Because entitlement is often just greed wearing domestic access. Nora sent formal subpoenas. Brent Lawson hired counsel within 48 hours. Belridge Fine Properties suspended Vivian indefinitely. The condo deposit disappeared from her accounts before it could be attached, which told Nora exactly where to look next. And all the while, Elias kept doing the most stubborn, ordinary thing possible. He kept working. He opened the shop every morning at 7. He changed water pumps, diagnosed misfires, called customers, ordered parts, balanced payroll. He drove home in the dark, slept in the guest room rather than the master, and learned there were whole corners of his own house that had been arranged for Vivian's photographs rather than anyone's living. Sometimes, late, he went out to the garage and just sat in the Chevelle with the lights off, not grieving, recalibrating. One Thursday, almost 3 weeks after the lockout, Nora came by the shop in person. That alone was unusual enough to set Theo whispering theatrically to Ben in the service bay. She found Elias at the workbench cleaning carburetor parts and laid a single printed page beside his elbow. "What's this?" he asked. "Your wife's brokerage access logs." He wiped his hands, picked up the page and frowned. Calendar entries, property showings. 2 nights at a private development event hosted by Lawson Luxury Communities. 1 weekend out-of-town conference in Asheville. At the bottom, an internal reimbursement entry with notes attached. Client cultivation dinner BL. Brent Lawson. Elias said nothing for a while. Then, without looking up, asked, "Did she sleep with him?" Nora folded her arms. "Do you need that answer for legal reasons or emotional ones?" He gave a short laugh with no humor in it. "Good question." She softened slightly. "We do not have proof of an affair," she said. "We do have evidence she diverted funds, concealed financial activity, and participated in attempts to leverage your business documents for outside credit exposure. If there was emotional betrayal too, it changes pain, not strategy." He nodded. "I know." Still, the question sat between them like a tool neither wanted but both recognized. Finally, Nora said, "For what it's worth, men like Brent often promise women they are helping them become freer, while really just teaching them how to become available." Elias looked at her then. "Sounds personal." She met his gaze evenly. "It's professional. I bill better after pattern recognition." That made him smile despite himself. Nora set another paper down. "Settlement conference next week," she said. "Vivian's attorney requested." He laughed outright this time. "Already? Apparently consequences are affecting her preferred lifestyle. What does she want?" "Likely leniency. Asset partition. Quiet exit." Elias looked at the carburetor parts, then out toward the bay where Theo was under a truck singing badly enough to constitute labor interference. "I don't want to ruin her," he said after a moment. Nora studied him. "That is to your credit," she said. "But do not confuse refusing cruelty with refusing consequence." He nodded slowly. That sentence followed him all week. Vivian looked tired. Not ruined. Not humbled exactly. But thinned around the edges in ways expensive concealer could not fully correct. The suspension from Belridge had become an internal review. Brent Lawson had stopped taking her calls unless his attorney was copied. The condo was gone. The Rover sat in Elias's shop lot now under a fitted cover while the bank waited for instructions. And 3 friends she had once called sisters had suddenly remembered scheduling conflicts every time her name lit their phones. She sat across from Elias in a conference room at Nora's office with her attorney, a fresh legal pad, and no wedding ring. Elias noticed the absence with less feeling than he would have imagined. Nora began. "We are prepared to proceed to formal claims on the vehicle sale, financial diversion, and attempted unauthorized guarantee exposure," she said. "However, my client is open to civil resolution conditioned on transparency, restoration, and clean separation." Vivian's attorney, Mr. Feld, cleared his throat. "Mrs. Turner acknowledges certain errors in judgment." Mara, seated against the wall as silent support, snorted so sharply Nora didn't have to. Vivian kept her eyes on the table. Elias watched her for a long moment. then said, "Why?" The question halted everyone. Vivian looked up. "Why what? Why the Chevelle?" Her face changed, not into sorrow, into impatience with being asked to narrate something she still mostly experienced as justified. "Because you loved it more than anything else in that house," she said. The room went still. Elias absorbed that, not because he agreed, because at last she had said something honest. He leaned back. "That's what you think this was about?" Vivian's laugh was small and brittle. "Please. You spent years in that garage while I held together a life you barely noticed." Nora did not interrupt. Neither did Feld. Some truths do not require legal management. Vivian continued, words gathering speed now that self-pity had a runway. "I was tired of always explaining you. Tired of pretending I didn't care when people asked why my husband never came to events or looked like everyone else's husbands or smelled like brake cleaner if he did come. Tired of living in a house that felt half-built because your real heart was always somewhere under a hood." Elias looked at her steadily. "And so you stole from me." Her jaw tightened. "I took value from something you worshipped." "No," he said quietly. "You tried to prove you could reach into the only place I still felt safe and leave fingerprints." The accuracy of it silenced her. For a moment no one spoke. Then Elias said, "Did you love me?" Vivian closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, there was no room left for theater. "I loved what being loved by you felt like," she said. Mara muttered a curse. Feld winced. Nora wrote something down, perhaps because even devastation can later become useful language. Elias sat with the answer. He found, to his own surprise, that it hurt less than the months of not knowing had hurt. Because false hope is heavier than truth, even ugly truth. He nodded once, then said, "All right." Vivian blinked. "That's it. That's enough." Nora slid the settlement draft forward. Terms were plain. Vivian would sign a confession of unauthorized transfer regarding the Chevelle and cooperate fully in any broker or title correction process. Criminal referral would remain stayed unless she violated settlement or concealed further assets. She would reimburse the diverted business funds through liquidation of personal accounts, jewelry, and investment proceeds from her aunt's remainder trust. She would relinquish any claim to the rover and assume none of its debt. The house would be sold, proceeds split after reimbursement offsets and loan satisfaction. She would have no access to Turner Auto records, accounts, or premises. Mutual non-disparagement applied. No public lies. No social media theater. No curated victimhood via neighborhood gossip. Vivian read the pages slowly. Halfway through, her hand stopped at one clause. She looked up at Elias. "You're keeping the Chevelle." He almost smiled. That was never a debate. Something like bitterness crossed her face. "You always did."